Senior Delegate Vorath had been reading the specifications aloud for 11 minutes. When I stopped counting and started cross-referencing, he had a good voice for it. Deep, resonant, the kind that filled a chamber without effort. The Vithani had 3 sets of vocal folds, and they knew how to use them. He read each line of the projection with the careful enunciation of a man who wanted to make sure everyone in the room understood exactly how he was. Drive output negligible, hull composite rating pre-industrial, weapons load described, in the official translation buffer I was wearing as ceremonial at best. There was laughter at that one. Not cruel laughter, the relaxed, comfortable laughter of a room that already knows the punchline and is just enjoying the delivery. I was sitting in the 3rd row observer gallery, which is what they called the section of the Vithani Accord Council chamber, where they put people they didn't need to look at, junior aides, data clerks, the occasional specialist dragged along to answer technical questions that never got asked. I had a pad in my lap and a cup of something the station described as tea, which it wasn't, and I had been taking notes since the session opened 4 hours ago. The notes were not interesting. Procedural motions, amended translation protocols, a territorial dispute about navigational beacon spacing that had consumed 90 minutes and resolved nothing. Then Vorath had stood up with his data package, and things had gotten livelier. The projection showed a vessel. Long, boxy, not elegant. Humans rarely build elegant. With what the accompanying spec sheet described as a Class 4 deep-range military hull, the data was labeled, in Vithani script, Recovered Human Strategic Asset Intelligence, Sector 12 Intercept, Verified. Vorath was using it to demonstrate formally, and for the record, that the human species represented no credible military concern within the Accord framework. He had supporting data. He had charts. He had gathered from the reactions around the chamber made this argument before. The council found it a pleasant way to spend an afternoon. Our senior delegate, Counselor Adara Fitch, sitting in the 1st row of the human section, and had not moved in some time. She had the stillness of someone who had decided, early, that the correct response was no response, and was committed to it. I looked at the projection. The spec sheet had a lot of numbers on it, and most of them were wrong, in the way that numbers are wrong when someone has pulled data without knowing what they're looking at. The drive output figure, for instance, was accurate for a vessel of that hull volume, but only for a specific subclass of that hull, the low-draw variant used in urban transit corridors where the power grid had priority caps. Military drives in that hull class ran about 40% higher. Not a small difference. I looked at the bottom left corner of the projection, where the file metadata lived. There was a hull registry line, partially cropped by the display frame. Most of it was visible. I typed the partial number into my pad and ran it against the Accord's public maritime registry, which took about 4 seconds. Vorath was now inviting the human delegation to respond to the data. He phrased it carefully, not as a question exactly, more as a generous offer to let us acknowledge something on the record before he did it for us. The council's mood was attentive. This was the part they'd been waiting for. Counselor Fitch had still not moved. I read the entry my pad had returned. I read it again. The chamber was quiet in the expectant way that chambers get when one side is waiting for the other side to concede something. Vorath had clasped 3 of his 4 hands and was regarding the human section with the expression. I had gotten reasonably good at Vithani expressions by this point in my posting, of a being who was enjoying the pause before a satisfying conclusion. I leaned slightly forward and spoke at a volume appropriate for a junior aide addressing a formal session, is to say clearly but without theatrics. Forgive the interruption, I said. The record. Could the council confirm the source designation on the recovered intelligence? I'm looking at hull registry Kilo 7 Delta to 992 in the display, and the public maritime database is returning a different classification than the spec sheet indicates. There was a small pause. Vorath looked at me the way senior delegates look at junior aides who speak during sessions, with the specific irritation of a person who has not finished making his point. The classification is standard military hull, as the data clearly indicates. The registry returns Civic Sanitation Hauler Perseverance, I said. Municipal Waste Authority, Port Dellen, licensed for low-orbit refuse transit and deep vacuum compaction operations. Crew complement of 11. The weapons mount in the projection appears to be a debris deflection emitter, rated for objects under 2 kilograms. I looked at my pad again. She was decommissioned 8 years ago. There's a small note here about a commemorative plaque. The chamber did not laugh. It did the other thing. The sound a room makes when it recalibrates. Vorath's 4 hands had come apart. He was looking at the projection. She was still visible behind him. The hull registry number was still in the bottom left corner, doing what it had been doing the entire time, which was accurately identifying a 30-year-old garbage barge from a mid-tier port city on a planet he had presumably never visited. The file designation, he said carefully, was verified by Sector 12 intelligence. I'm sure it was, I said. The registry number is public. It's been public since she was commissioned. I set my pad on my knee. I don't know what data Sector 12 thought they were capturing, but the vessel, in the projection, is Perseverance. Last recorded mission was hauling construction waste from the Dellen Orbital Expansion Project. According to the decommission filing, final crew threw a small party. Counselor Fitch had turned her head slightly to look at me. Her expression was not readable. Mostly I think she was confirming I was real, and had actually said what I had said. Vorath turned to his attaché. The attaché turned to a subordinate. There was a quiet exchange I could not hear. And then a longer quiet. And then Vorath turned back to face the chamber with the expression, and I want to be precise here, of a being who has just understood something he would very much like to have understood an hour and a half earlier. The council's presiding arbiter, who had been silent throughout, spoke for the first time. Her voice was measured and entirely without warmth. She asked whether the Vithani delegation wished to request a recess to review the provenance of the submitted intelligence. Vorath said that would be appropriate. The session was suspended. The projection went dark. The chamber began to empty with the particular efficiency of a room full of people who have somewhere else to be, and are very interested in being there. I finished the tea substitute and made a note in my log. Counselor Fitch came to find me in the observer gallery, while the aides were gathering their things. She stood for a moment without saying anything, which was how she started most of her conversations. The registry number was in the corner the whole time, she said. Yes, you checked it. I had time, I said. She nodded once, the way she did when she was deciding whether to say more and deciding against it. Then she picked up her case and walked toward the exit. I filed the session transcript, flagged the intelligence provenance issue for the record, and noted in the action items that the council had agreed to reconvene with verified data at a date to be determined. As far as I know, they have not yet scheduled the follow-up session. Perseverance is apparently on display in the Port Dellen Municipal Museum of Civil Works. Plaque says, she served the city faithfully for 27 years. I thought that was a reasonable thing to put on a plaque.